Chapter 58. Biblical Justice. Nearly an hour had passed before they heard Skinner's manacled hands and ankles jangling as he shuffled through the door. "Nice to see you, Agent Parker and Detective Wright. So, what did you want to talk about?" Parker looked him dead in the eyes. "We really have all the evidence we need. So, we have just a few questions." Parker smiled and leaned toward Skinner. "So, are you going to request the needle or the noose? You're assuming that I'll make it to trial. And why wouldn't you?" Wright asked. "A lot can happen between now and then. And as you know, the Lord works in mysterious ways." "You're right. A lot will happen, but I don't see the Lord helping you wander the streets to look for more victims." "If you say so." Skinner leaned back in his chair, folded his arms, and with his head arrogantly cocked to the side, he said, "So, ask your questions. I didn't know that you were a religious man, let alone a fanatic." "Fanatic? This is not about religious fanaticism. This is about biblical justice. This is about retribution and the Word of God. So, you think that God is talking to you and telling you to mutilate these people?" "God does not talk to me. God talks to Toppy Lowe." "Toppy what?" Wright asked. "Toppy Lowe. He and his servant, Pa say, tell me God's will. I am merely an acolyte of Toppy Lowe, a conduit for his message and a vessel for his power. God tells Topolo and Topolo tells me what to do, and I carry out his will." Parker noticed Wright's quizzical expression as Wright looked back and forth at him, and then at Skinner. Wright said, "Oh, I get it. You're going for the diminished capacity plea. You're hearing voices, and you're obeying the voices. It's a classic defense. Not very imaginative, but classic. I'm not just hearing voices. I'm living the voices. I am the voice and power of Toppy Lowe. The voice and power of the Lord." There was little that Parker wanted to say that would not, in Wright's eyes, put Parker sitting next to Skinner on the crazy train. So, Parker found a safer haven in silence. He stood, walked past Skinner, and leaned against the wall behind him. "So, is it like having a radio tuned to an FM station like KRZY?" Wright asked. Skinner contemptuously sneered. "You're a silly little godless man. Toppy Lowe will take pleasure in your punishment." Wright leaned back in his chair, folded his arms, and nonchalantly said, "You mean the all-powerful servant of God who couldn't protect you? So, I guess that makes Agent Parker more powerful than Toppy Lowe. Wait, does that make Agent Parker a god?" Skinner lurched out of his seat and, as if from a 1950s B-movie, ranted, "Sacrilege. Blasphemer. You will feel the wrath of Toppy Lowe. He will rend your flesh to shreds, tear out your eyes, and boil the meat from your bones. Toppy Lowe will." As Wright slowly rose, Skinner suddenly fell silent. Skinner stumbled backwards against the chair and tumbled to the floor. Stepping towards Skinner came Wright, transforming into the shaman. "Spawn of Satan," Skinner cried. The shaman stood over him, staring into his eyes. Skinner cringed. The shaman raised his head, looked at Parker, and nodded. Skinner wrenched his head around to look at Parker and swung his body around until he was on his hands and knees. From his knees, he stretched up, leaned toward Parker. Cocking his head slightly side to side, he peered up into Parker's eyes as if a secret were hidden in them. Suddenly, Skinner's eyes sprung wide open. He scrambled backwards, braced himself against the wall, and trembled as he pointed at Parker. "Sit Malum. Maleficus." Skinner quickly stood and headed to the door. Pounding on the door, he yelled, "Get them out of here. Get them out of here. They have risen from the bowels of hell to destroy me, to destroy my message." Sergeant Riley quickly opened the door. "What the hell is going on in here?" Skinner spun toward Wright and Parker and shouted, "Demons. Evil blasphemers. Slaves of hell." He spun back to Riley, grabbed his shoulders, and pleaded, "I have to talk to Detective Martin before it's too late." "Calm down." Riley turned to Agent Parker, "Detective Wright. Are you done with Mr. Skinner?" "I guess so. In his state, I don't think we're going to get anywhere. Mr. Skinner, I'm going to take you back to your cell and tell the captain that you want to talk to Detective Martin." The sergeant escorted a shaken Skinner back to his cell. All the way to the cell, Skinner clasped his hands in prayer, repeatedly begging, "Oh God, save me." Wright turned to Parker. "God? So he's sticking with on the voice of God. I think he's out of his fucking mind, but I sure as hell don't want to say that in court and have this maniac get away with those murders." It's not pleasant to think about him spending his life in Shady Acres, especially assisting in the kitchen using the cutlery. Wright and Parker left the interrogation room, picked up their weapons, thanked Sergeant Riley, and left the detention area. Wright asked, why the hell would he suddenly insist on talking to Lindy? I have no idea, Parker replied, and pressed the up button at the elevator. Chapter 59. The Escape. Parker, hang on. I need to talk to you. Parker and Wright turned around in time to see Melinda locking the lab door behind her. She hurried toward them holding a paper in her hand. Have you seen Lindy? She asked. Yeah. She was down here a little while ago wanting to interrogate Skinner, but we told her she'd have to wait until we were done. Wright added, then she pulled a Lindy. Went ballistic. Stormed into the elevator, practically knocking the captain over. Parker corrected, Right, that's an exaggeration. She merely bumped him. So, Melinda, what have you got that's so important? I've got some anomalies with the Ashley Barkley investigation. That has nothing to do with me. Lindy's running that one. See, that's the thing. I think they're connected. How? Well, Mayor Barkley came down to identify his daughter, and don't tell me it's not her. Unfortunately, it is her. Anyway, I told him that he wouldn't be able to take her clothes home yet. So he glances over at the clothes and gets a weird look on his face. He walks over and picks up the evidence bag, looks carefully at the clothes, and says that they are not her clothes, and she wouldn't wear anything like them, ever. Then he says, especially the shoes. So, after he leaves, I take a good look at the shoes, and they look familiar. Then I look at the clothes. They look familiar. Then I got the lab tests back for the clothes. She handed the paper to Parker. Look at what they found on the clothes and shoes. Parker quickly read through the paper. Pumicite and volcanic ash. Right. The same kind that was found on Skinner's victims. A curious expression surfaced on Parker. Okay. Guess whose shoes and clothes they are? I'm guessing that they don't belong to Ashley, Parker said. Right. I'm almost certain that they're Lindy's. I'm 99% sure that the shoes are hers. No one else would wear shoes like that, especially not Ashley. 99%? Parker said dubiously. Okay, 85%, but no less than 80%. Wright and Parker looked at each other. Shit, they said in unison. Parker ran back to Sergeant Riley and told him that under no circumstance was he to let Lindy talk to Skinner. If she tries, call Captain Johnson. Just keep her away from him and don't let her bully you into seeing him. Riley looked perplexed but nodded. Parker hurried back into the elevator. We need to talk to Captain Johnson. He pushed the up button. The door closed, and all three remained silent on the ride up. No one wanted to admit what was on their minds. When the elevator doors opened again, they could see Lindy's open door from across the room. She was sitting with her elbows on her desk and her head resting on her hands. Parker and Wright moved quickly and quietly, but Melinda's short, clunky heels tapped dully on the linoleum tile floor. At Johnson's door, Parker turned back to Wright. Better keep an eye on Lindy. She might try to bolt. Wright turned back down the hallway toward his desk. Parker threw the captain's door open. Melinda, and he rushed in. Melinda began to inform the captain of the evidence that she had found. Parker's phone rang. Martin isn't in her office. She might be on the run. I'm heading down the back stairs to the parking garage, Wright said. Parker could hear Wright's footsteps echoing in the stairwell. Crap. She's getting into her car. I'll grab my car and meet you out front, Wright said. Parker shoved the phone back into his pocket. Captain, I've got to go. Wait. What the fuck's going on? Johnson asked. Detective Martin's on the run. Parker gave a quick wave of his hand, hurried out the door, and headed for the side stairs. Parker could hear the horn blaring as soon as he entered the alley at the side of the station. Seattle had decided to do what it often does, darken the day with thick black rain clouds. By the time Parker exited the alley, a deluge of rain was bouncing off every surface and laying a thick sheet of water on the sidewalk. Wright's car sat at the curb 30 feet ahead. The brake light blared along with the horn. As Parker rushed up from behind, he looked down the street. Detective Martin's brake lights flashed and disappeared to the right around the corner of the second stoplight. When he got to the end of the car, Wright was still fixed on the front door of the station. Parker slapped the trunk as he moved to the passenger's door. Wright's head jerked. Parker opened the door, slid in, and slammed the door. She just turned right at the second stoplight. We can't lose her. Punch it, Parker shouted. Don't worry. I won't lose her. Through the windshield, the city's lights were sparkling blurs and rainbow halos. Wright flipped on the wipers. The sheet of water rode the wipers, and for a moment, the glistening and halos vanished. The rain pounded harder. He turned up the wipers, checked for traffic, pulled away from the curb, and drove his foot to the floor. The wheels spun on the wet pavement, caught, and the car lurched forward. At the second light, Wright turned right. They could see two red taillights flare in the distance. Wright pushed his foot to the floor again. The car fishtailed. He turned the steering wheel against the rear wheel's slide. The car straightened and sped on. They began to gain ground just as she turned onto the freeway. When they were within 500 feet of her, Parker said, "Wright, keep your distance." It wasn't noon yet, and while it was dark and the rain was heavy, Parker didn't want Detective Martin to spot their headlights. "Shut off your lights. In this downpour, give it a shot. We don't want her to spot us. The freeway is lit, so it shouldn't be too bad." "Okay." A few minutes later, Wright briefly glanced over at Parker. "So, you think she's involved in the spooky murders? And the Ashley Barkley one too? It's too much of a coincidence to have pumicite and volcanic ash on her clothes. Don't see any other reason for it." "Detective Martin is in this deep," Parker said. "When did you first suspect that she was involved in the spooky and Ashley murders?" Wright asked. "Probably right when you did. Although I knew something wasn't right when she was so anxious to talk to Skinner before we did. My guess is that she thought that Skinner was going to give her up as an accomplice, and she wanted to convince him not to. But now when I look back on some of her strange behavior, it all makes sense. I should have seen it. I just thought you were the reason that she was acting stranger than usual." "I did too. Do you think she knows that we know?" "I don't know. Maybe. Probably. She must. Why else would she be on the run?" "She's not on the run. If she were, she'd head north toward Canada, not south. No, she's going to get rid of any evidence that would implicate her. She's headed to Mount St. Helens. And if we don't lose her, my guess is she will lead us right to the murder site." Parker's cell phone rang. It was Johnson. Melinda had filled him in. Parker put his cell phone on speaker. "This is fucking insane," Johnson started. It was enough of a shock to find out that Skinner was that butcher spooky. And now to find out that Detective Martin was protecting and helping him. The world's gone fucking mad. Why would they do it? Why would Lindy throw in with Skinner? She hated the guy. This just doesn't make any sense. If the old shaman was right, Parker knew what had happened. So, he gave an honest but vague answer. Something must have gotten into them. Something changed them. What? They both went insane at the same time? How's that possible? Parker wasn't about to introduce Johnson to a supernatural rendition of the crime. If he did, Johnson would just add him to the list of the delusional. But that was the only reason that Parker could come up with to explain how Lindy became Skinner's partner in butchery. Somehow Toppy Lowe had seduced her as he had seduced Skinner. But that was an explanation he would have to keep to himself. Right now, he had to make sure that Lindy was stopped. Regardless of what was the cause, this had to end now. How he would end it, he had no idea. Could he end it? He did not know. The reality was that Parker had no idea about the powers with which he was dealing. All he had were bizarre dreams, unbelievable experiences, legendary Cowlet's supernatural entities, and some rickety old shaman telling him that he was the one who had to stop it. He had no idea why all of this was happening or why he had been chosen. All this crap about the absence of a dark mass and hate in him didn't fit with what he knew or thought of himself. All he knew was that he was heading into something in which he appeared to be a main character, but in which he had little understanding. As he saw it, he was the protagonist in a play for which he had no script. If this had been happening to someone else, he simply wouldn't believe it. Since it was happening to him, he was scared. "Parker, be careful. She's armed, and she took all her clips. I no longer know what she's capable of," Johnson warned. "I'll call the Skamania sheriff and have him get a backup team ready. No, we don't know where she's going yet. If this goes nowhere, I don't want them thinking we don't know what the hell we're doing. And if there's another reason for Detective Martin's actions, the department's reputation will take a big hit for nothing. I mean, your lead detective as part of these murders is going to look bad, to say the least. If I need backup, I'll call the sheriff," Parker said. Parker's arguments were intended to make sure that no one else would interfere. He had a good idea where she was going. But if he was going to find himself confronting her and Topilo and Paase, he didn't want a cadre of police, local or otherwise, interfering. "Okay, But don't take any chances, Captain Johnson said. With that, the conversation ended. Parker looked straight ahead. Well, I guess that means we're on our own. Chapter 60. The Merger. You will not be alone. The voice was small and scratchy, the tone firm. Parker turned toward Wright. Wright was facing straight ahead. A faint, partially transparent head began to form inside Wright's head. Separating from Wright's head, the ghostly head turned and gazed sternly at Parker. It was freaky enough at the restaurant to have Wright morph into and out of the old shaman, but to see the ghostly image of the old man living inside Wright drove Parker's back against the passenger door. The shaman began. The time has come. Tapilo's protector will lead you to more than the murder site. She will lead you to Paase and Tapilo. They are powerful spirits. You must defeat them. If you do not, their warriors will rise and nothing will satisfy their thirst for revenge. The land will be soaked with the blood of the innocent. He paused and reached his translucent hand toward Parker, pointed his bony, shriveled finger at Parker, and said, "You must be ready to sacrifice your life." That wasn't what Parker wanted to hear. He was hoping that the shaman was a hallucination, and he was merely insane. All he wanted to do was to contend with Lindy and a clip or two of ammo. Metaphorically fighting evil spirits that cannot be killed but only imprisoned was one thing. Literally dying in the process for what by any rational person was the product of a deluded mind seemed completely insane now. He felt as if he was stuck in a nightmare from which he could not awaken, and he was being asked to treat this world as if it was normal. "I don't understand this, any of it," an agitated Parker said. And then the silent questions flooded forward. Why is this happening? Where does all this come from? How can a world like this exist? Why haven't I ever seen this world before? Where has it been? It's so insane. How can this world be real? The shaman smiled and said, "There is a world that has always been here. You had just never seen it before because you never needed to. It is a world that the tribe's shamans and the chosen warriors have always lived with. It is only they who have kept the darkness from taking over this land and kept troubled people from becoming vicious savages. You denied this world, but now you know it to be true. It is time for you to know the story that has been told to the Cowlitz shamans for many generations." The shaman held out his hand. With a small flash of blue light, a talon appeared in the palm of his hand. He closed his hand around the talon. 2 inches of the sharp end of the talon protruded from his fist. He pulled his arm back and rapidly swept his fist out, and then with the cry of a hawk drove the talon into the scar on Parker's chest. Parker echoed the hawk's cry. A thin blue fractured streak of light rode from the scar, up his neck and flashed into his eyes. Parker jerked, froze and locked eyes with the shaman. Suddenly, the origin story came flooding into his mind. It was the myth of Lalatla, Tapilo, Paase, the Seco army, and the destruction that would follow if Tapilo set the warriors free. The shaman removed the talon and opened his hand. A small burst of blue light surrounded the talon. It vanished,